Welcome everyone! So what are things we really like in a chess game? We want exciting players, checkmating attacks, interesting openings. Well, today's game has all of that. I'm featuring another game of Alexander Morozevich, a former world number 2 and still one of the most creative and exciting players of the modern age. He faced Judit Polgar. At her peak she was also in the world's top 10. This was played in the Tata Steel tournament in the year 2000. Polgar had white and opened with e4. And Morozevich plays a French defense. Not very popular at the top level, but Morozevich played it a lot because it can lead to very double-edged games, and that's what he likes to play. After d4, d5, white played knight to c3, so Morozevich can go for a winner if he wants with bishop to b4, but he has another very interesting variation in mind. After knight to f6, bishop to g5, then he took, knight takes, then bishop to e7. Now black threatens to take the knight, therefore bishop takes f6. But here Morozevich recaptured with the pawn. This is the so-called burn variation, a very interesting defense. Black's pawns are doubled, but he could use the open file for a rook and he has the bishop pair. Now let me quickly show another way for black to play. So this wasn't played in the game, but after knight to f3, black often goes b6. And after these developing moves, black will go queen to c7, knight to d7, and castle on the queen side. And black of course can go for play on the g-file, but also on the queen side with b5 and knight to b6. Very interesting way to play. Tigran Petrosian liked to play like that, so you may want to check out his games. Morozevich, however, went his own way. After knight to f3, he instead played a6, and after g3 he went b5. So he's also going for the fianchetto, but he also wants to constrain white's pawns, in particular the c-pawn. That way black keeps more control over the d5 square. It continued bishop g2, bishop b7, queen e2 and knight to d7. Black's planning to put the bishop on d5, so knight to d7 keeps the diagonal open. Both sides then castled. No queenside castling for black this time. The king is safe enough on the king side. The pawn on f6 also protects some important squares. And here rook from a to d1 was played, but that's probably not the most accurate move. And bishop to d5 highlights that fact. White would have liked to play c3, then b3 and c4, but if white goes c3 here, then black can simply take on a2. So it is harder for white to get some play now. Putting the other rook on d1 definitely would have been better. It continued rook from f to e1, king to h8, so Morozevich is going to use the g-file at some point. And after knight from f to d2 and c6, with the bishop now locked in by the pawns, white now decided to not prepare c4 anymore. She played c4 right away. And after pawn takes and knight takes, white is solid, but it's actually not easy to improve the position, and that's mainly because white cannot really challenge black's grip on d5. And you'll see that the game begins to turn black's way now. It continued a5, knight to c3, rook to e8, but here Polgar went knight to e3. Probably she should have went for knight to a4 and b3 right away, because after f5, she now returned the knight to c4, and after queen to b8, played knight to a4 anyway. It's hard to say in this game what mistakes white made exactly, but losing time like this certainly worked out for black. Black basically got that f5 move for free now, and little things like that do add up. Morozevich now played queen to b4. Now both knights are hanging, so b3. Bishop f6. That's where the bishop often ends up in the burn variation. Now it's looking at e5 and the isolated d-pawn. And after queen to c2, rook to g8. Another common move for this variation, the rook now occupies the semi-open file, opposing the white king. And that doubled f-pawn may well turn into an attacking unit. Maybe Polgar at this point should have played actively with a3, and if then queen to f8, go for a knight trade like this, Black now also has some weaknesses on the queen side and black's attacking potential is somewhat reduced. In the game, queen to c1 was played, but then rook to g4, there's pressure on d4, knight to e5 blocks out the bishop, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop e7, but after rook to d3 and rook from a to g8, we can see that Morozevich has made clear progress. With both rooks now on the g-file, he's already threatening with f4, weakening white's king position, and then he may even throw the h-pawn up the board as well. Black's queen and bishops are also well placed, by the way, just dominating the queen side. Meanwhile, Polgar really achieved nothing so far. She has to find something to compensate for all of this. Here she went rook from e to d1, getting the rook out of the sight of black's queen, so maybe white's queen can get active now. But it looks like Polgar changed her mind, because after f4, she instead tried to trade queens with queen to c3, but Morozevich just continued as planned. First f takes g3, and after pawn takes, indeed that h-pawn ran up the board, and something really nasty could happen on g2 if white loses his pawn cover. That's why bishop takes d5 was played, but it's still black that's having all the fun. White's pieces just aren't doing anything, especially that knight on a4 is really poorly placed. Polgar therefore tried rook to f3, at least that rook is now targeting f7, and after king to g7, she thought she was increasing the pressure with queen to c7, but clearly she missed what Morozevich had in mind. He first went h4, that one was expected, then king to g2 and pawn takes g3, but it must have been after f takes g3 that Polgar had missed black's next move. Queen to e4 is now a great move. Polgar either missed that one or she thought she could take the bishop, but white would be losing now. Black would go queen e2 check, and after king to h3 and queen takes rook, white is now forced to play queen f6 check, otherwise it's just mate. But after queen takes, pawn takes and king takes f6, black is up an exchange and a pawn, so white definitely cannot take the bishop. Going back to the game, white instead dropped the queen back to defend, but Morozevich had found a very neat finish. First queen e2 check, and when the king hit on h3, the quiet rook move, rook to g5, sets up a quick kill and Polgar resigned. Why did she resign? Rook h8 mate is threatened. White can only delay the mate with rook takes f7 and rook to d4, so that after the check, the rook blocks, but mate is coming anyway after rook takes rook, pawn takes and queen g2 checkmate. Very well played by Morozevich. It doesn't look like Polgar made any big blunder, she simply got outplayed. It started out with this somewhat unorthodox but very interesting burn variation of the French. Morozevich then succeeded in controlling the d5 square. Then Polgar didn't improve her position, she just went in circles with her knights, eventually ending up with this offside knight on a4. And when Morozevich reached this position, it was really plain sailing from there. And finally, this rook g5 move was a classy end to the game. Very nice and an instructive example of this very interesting burn variation. You may want to check it out. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this game. If you enjoyed it, please do me a favor and simply like the video, and do consider subscribing to the channel. More games are already underway. I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.